Thank you, everybody. Welcome. Good morning. My name is Nomalanga Mkize, and I am the Acting Director of School for the School of Governmental and Social Sciences at Nelson Mandela University. Welcome to this hybrid event that we are hosting today. Deputy Minister Alvin Bortes, good morning. Vice Chancellor Sibongile Mutwa, good morning. Deputy Vice Chancellors, ambassadors, and anyone joining us online, officials of the department, executives of Nelson Mandela University, the SRCs, and other student formations present, the Greater Nelson Mandela University community, the greater public, and all those in attendance virtually. Thank you for joining us for this hybrid live stream for this public lecture by the Deputy Minister of the Department of International Relations and Cooperation, entitled Celebrating Multilateralism and South Africa's Role on the UN Security Council and Chairship of the African Union. If you are with us today, you will have your program in front of you. It's a very simple program. We're going to have an address by the Vice Chancellor of the university to welcome everybody, and then we will get the Deputy Minister to deliver his public lecture, after which there will be a response from the discussant expert, Dr. Stembile Mbete, as well as Dr. Pilani Mthembu, who is also joining us virtually. And when the speakers come up, I will read a biography of them. And also a good and warm welcome to our student respondents, Mr. Buntu Mnyaka and Mr. Meshek Mugabe, who will also join us virtually. This occasion gives us an opportunity to engage rigorously on South Africa's role in multilateral institutions on the global stage. With the advent of democracy and the end of apartheid, South Africa's voice in international affairs has been of great interest and significance because of the global nature of the anti-apartheid struggle and the relationships formed across the world in defeating that system. As such, this occasion gives us the opportunity to commemorate the greater support and solidarity shown to the oppressed peoples of South Africa by the non-aligned movement and other bodies which largely stood in the global south, asserting the right for South Africa to be free. With such a rich and illustrious history of internationalism forming part of South Africa's liberation heritage, it gives me great pleasure to welcome you all and to thank our Vice Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, for leading Nelson Mandela University in this initiative. And I would like to invite her to say a few words on behalf of the university. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Professor Mkize, for being our program director, but also for all the work that you have been involved in the lead up to this event, and for those cogent and appropriate, incisive remarks. Thank you very much. I would like to take this opportunity to first and foremost greet our Deputy Minister, Deputy Minister Alvin Bortes, and to thank the Deputy Minister for coming to do this lecture here at Mandela University. I would like to recognize excellencies and ambassadors and high commissioners that are participating. I know that High Commissioner Tambo had intended to participate. I hope she is on the platform, and all the other ambassadors and our friends of the university and of our government that I have not mentioned by name. The colleagues in the Department of International Relations and Cooperation that are accompanying the Deputy Minister. I want to greet them. I want to greet our Deputy Vice Chancellors today that are here. I've seen the Deputy Vice Chancellor Kiet for Engagement and Transformation, Deputy Vice Chancellor, Dr. Thandi Mgwebi, Research, Research, Innovation and Internationalization. And I'm sure our other Deputy Vice Chancellors are online. I want to recognize the Deans of Faculty, particularly the Dean of Humanities this morning, who is behind the hosting of this event, Professor Pamela Masego, and the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jack. I want to greet all the professors, the backbone of the academy, the academics, the university colleagues that are here, the representatives of the student formations, our new SRC, and our outgoing SRC. We are tomorrow going to be having an acceptance event for our new SRC, where they are going to take their vow of leadership with integrity. I want to greet all our students, particularly those that are pursuing their studies in humanities. Our discussants, I've seen Stembile here, Dr. Mbete, who is no stranger to public intellectualism in our country, a young up and coming scholar, and I would like to greet her. And then I've had my small brief conversation with her, which I will pursue later. Dr. Pilani Mthembu from the Institute of Global Dialogue, I believe, and our other participants that are going to be responding, including our student respondents that Nomalanga has mentioned. The Deputy Minister has indicated to me earlier on that part of his intention of coming to this university is to make sure that there are discussions and engagements with thought leaders who are not part of the state sector, so that ours is the insertion of ourselves and our thinking into the world informed by intellectual contribution of our academics and our scholars in this field. So I welcome you all warmly to this lecture today. Nelson Mandela University is indeed proud to be partnering Deputy Minister with the Ministry and the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. I do want to say that Dr. Naledi Pandor is an old friend of our university in many respects, and she has supported this university for many years. So I want to extend my greetings to the minister through you and your other Deputy Minister, Ms. Mashiko, as well. I just want to say that the topic of the symposium that reflects on the role of South Africa that is playing in fostering multilateralism in Africa and the rest of the world is a timely contribution. If there is one lesson that has emerged from the suffering and loss that has been brought about by the coronavirus pandemic, it must be surely that our fate as the country and continent is intimately bound and, with that of other nations across the globe. In this regard, we need to fashion a global dialogue that seeks to integrate solutions to the complex socioeconomic and political challenges that confront us as one world. As Nelson Mandela University, we anchor our approach to internationalization on the tireless work of our namesake, Nelson Rolihlahla Mandela, and all of the leaders of that selfless generation who stood out as principled global leaders and internationalists of conscience. And so we regard today's symposium as an ideal opportunity to take forward that work and explore multilateralism and South Africa's role on the United Nations Security Council and our country's leadership and role in the participation and leadership of the African Union. So we are really indeed looking forward to this lecture, Deputy Minister, and we thank you for it. I trust that our engagements, our discussions and debates today will be reflective and critical, and they will seek ways to reveal to ourselves primarily, because it is important that we reveal these matters to ourselves, not juxtaposed against anyone, our potential as a catalyzing and an enabling nation and an active partner in ensuring continental advancement, to continue to be a global voice for cohesive coexistence as anticipated by our post-liberation founders of our now free country. But I also hope this engagement will reassert our reputation as a nation that has defied prediction of what an African country could achieve to inspire hope and renewal of its long oppressed people. Indeed, I also believe that we will use this opportunity to be self-critical. It is particularly important that there are students and student formations that are participating today. To those students who are pursuing their studies in humanities in particular, through which you engage with political discourse and learn the intricacies and craft of diplomacy and multilateralism, we trust that when all is said and done, when we have left this university, you will deploy these skills as public officials in the service of the country and the continent. And surely some of you will proudly represent the country through ambassadorial and other consular deployments. At Mandela University, we believe that every student needs exposure to an international perspective. As a result, our internationalization strategy aims to promote comprehensive internationalization, which endeavors to integrate our University Nelson Mandela within a global knowledge economy. This, in turn, we believe will enhance our global positioning, pedagogical and scholarly relevance, and contribute to the development of graduates who are ready to engage with the rest of the world and the demands of global labor market. To be sure, the strategic thrust of the university's internationalization efforts places the African continent at the center. We have prioritized expanding our African footprint. Central to our guiding framework is to seek and to strengthen our association with those countries that constituted Nelson Mandela's 1962 travel throughout the African continent to seek support and mobilize resources for the liberation struggle of South Africa at that time. It further includes those countries Madiba visited upon his release from prison in 1990, as well as those which we have continued to work with through our different presidents and leaders, and with whom we have established strong relations with as a country through the initial work of our founding president in their peace building processes. Our engagements with partner institutions in these countries will seek to identify modalities of working together to contribute to the socio-economic development needs of the continent through the pursuit of scholarly and research collaborations. We aim to work together with partners and stakeholders on initiatives that will inform our contribution towards the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and the aspirations and objectives of the African Union's Agenda 2063. The recent release of the Times Higher Education Impact Rankings has indicated that Nelson Mandela University is now emerging as a leader in the sustainability sciences in South Africa and indeed in our continent. So I want to congratulate my colleagues over the years that have done this work in a multidisciplinary fashion, leading to this recognition of our University recently. Later this year, Deputy Minister, we will launch the Raymond Mhlaba Center, and I want to recognize Professor Ntombana, who is the head of the Raymond Mhlaba Center at our university. This center will be the hub for public leadership, management, and development work at our university. Through the scholarship, capacity building, research, and policy work that the center seeks to undertake, we believe that the university can make a noteworthy contribution to strengthen the skills and competencies that are needed to underpin and inform our country's multilateral endeavors. And this indeed attests to our stated and by now well-known ambition to revitalize humanities, because it is through the revitalization of humanities that we feel our university can strengthen and galvanize its scholarship that seeks to respond to the commanding challenges that are facing our country, our continent, and the globe at the moment. In so doing, the country will continue to make a valuable contribution to global platforms such as the United Nations and the African Union. As my colleagues would realize, I have had this morning, Deputy Minister, to exercise a lot of restraint in not delving into some of the very excellent and exciting work that our faculties and entities are engaged in the realization of what we prefer to call here at Mandela as Africa purposed and globally relevant scholarship that will ensure that our university stays true to its promise of an anchored and placed university that is in service to society. I hope that during the discussion, Nomalanga, our colleagues will be able to also just share the work that we are doing in a range of, through the chairs that we have in the humanities, for example, the ocean cultures and heritage, African feminisms chair, and our chair on identities, African identities and philosophy. So I actually am trying to restrain myself, Deputy Minister, because it is an exciting time at our university. Our university has not always paid sufficient attention to humanities, and I'm really very proud in the manner that our scholars have responded to the call to reasset this work. So Professor Mkhize, I look forward to a robust engagement in the course of the deliberations this morning. I thank you and I welcome you again to Nelson Mandela University. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Vice Chancellor. Owing to COVID protocols and other issues of concern, I'd like to just, if you could indulge me just for 1 or 2 minutes while we go through our security briefing, and then we will welcome the Deputy Minister. Thank you.
Good morning. I'm Nokuzola Sukwana. I'm a SHE officer. I'll be doing a safety briefing with you this morning. You are currently inside the conference center building. It is in an unlikely event of an emergency alarm will go off. Please calmly evacuate the building using the following exit points, which is one on the left and the other one on the right. And the other exit door on the main building will be on my right. Down the passage, and the exit door will be in front of you. Go outside the building and turn right The emergency point will be further down the open space opposite the building. If the emergency is caused by fire, try to leave the doors closed. This will confine the fire. If it is a bomb threat, please leave the doors open. Please leave all your belongings inside. For the ladies, if you are wearing high heel shoes, please take them off. Please make sure that you have signed the register. It will be used to take the roll call when you are outside. Do not come back to the building unless it is declared safe to do so by the security. In terms of environmental management, please note that the university is situated in a nature reserve. This means that you may come into contact with wild animals. Common animals that you are likely to see or come into contact with are the following, which is the monkeys. They are unlikely to attack you unless they feel threatened. Please do not feed them. Do not shout at them. If it comes your way, try to stand still and look away. There is no planned drill. There is no planned emergency drill today. If an alarm is activated, please respond immediately. Lastly, I would like to request that the doors to remain open to give enough ventilation. I thank you.
Thank you. Those are some of the perks of having a university with a nature reserve. Allow me to please read the biography of our speaker today, Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation of the Republic of South Africa, Mr. Alvin Bottas. Mr. Alvin Bottas holds a bachelor's degree in technology of business administration, a postgraduate diploma in public and development management, and a national diploma in management obtained from the Cape Peninsula University of Technology, CPUT. He is currently reading towards his master's in management at Wits University. He worked full-time for the African National Congress Northern Cape as provincial head of policy, research, and analysis for 10 years, from 1999 to 2009. He served as ANC Youth League provincial treasurer, provincial chairperson, and on the National Executive Committee from 2003 to 2009. He also served in the ANC Provincial Executive Committee and as Deputy Provincial Secretary from 2003 to 2017. He was a member of the Northern Cape Provincial Legislature from 2009 to 2018. During this period, he was also appointed as a member of the Executive Council in Northern Cape Provincial Cabinet and served in the following capacities: as MEC for Social Development from April 2009 to June 2013, MEC for Cooperative Governance, Human Settlements and Traditional Affairs from June 2013 to February 2018. In February 2018, he became a member of the National Assembly, an MP, and served as a member of the portfolio committees on basic education, water and sanitation, and sports and recreation. In December 2017, he was elected as an NEC member and serves on the following NEC subcommittees, namely Information and Communications, National Dispute and Resolutions Committee, Social Transformation, and International Relations. In May 2019, he was appointed by President Cyril Ramaphosa as Deputy Minister of International Relations and Cooperation. With that, Deputy Minister, I would like to welcome you onto this platform.
Thank you very much, Professor Mkhize, for that welcome. The VC of Nelson Mandela University, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, Professor Thandi Mehwe, the Deputy VC Professor Maseko, the Dean of Humanities, Dr. Sitembile Mbete, and Dr. Bilani Mtembu, who is the chief respondents today. And then, of course, our student respondents, Mr. Mnyaka and Mr. Mugabe of the South African Union of Students. I thought, VC, let me start with a particular quote that says, the cardinal responsibility of leadership is to identify the dominant contradiction at each point of the historical process and to work out a central line to resolve it. Quote Mao Zedong. I think, ladies and gentlemen, it's quite opportune that we speak about multilateralism, how to deepen multilateralism, and what efforts the South African state is putting forward to negate the temptation on unilateralism. I think we wish to make a statement that, of course, your global environment at the historical context was still grappling with challenges as it relates to the end of the Cold War, where you had a dominant state in global politics that depict what can be correctly characterized as a unipolar agenda under the auspices of the Washington Consensus. However, ladies and gentlemen, the historical context of international relations and diplomacy was traditionally a state-centered forte. However, of recently, we have been able to better appreciate the role of the plethora of non-state actors and the multiplicity of a number of other range of actors in the execution of South Africa's foreign policy imperatives. Today, our globalized world has become more volatile, uncertain, complex, and ambiguous. And therefore, the Department of International Relations, under the leadership of Dr. Naledi Pandor, have to develop effective strategies to counterbalance volatility with vision, to counterbalance uncertainty with understanding, complexity with clarity, and ambiguity with agility. We are also confronted as a democratic state with what we call cross-cutting and border-blind challenges, including global warming, terrorism, global pandemics, and cybersecurity. It is my submission, ladies and gentlemen, that global governance architecture is at a crossroads as it struggles to maintain and retain this type of contemporary stateless challenges afflicting mankind. Importantly, ladies and gentlemen, South Africa's national interest displays what can be categorized as a people-centered, progressive, and developmental outlook, evident in the execution of our foreign policy. Our canon that express our 4 foreign policy priorities, chief amongst it being promotion of Pan-Africanism, South-to-South solidarity, the deepening of cooperation between the more industrialized North and the underdeveloped South, and of course, multilateral cooperation. We, of course, ladies and gentlemen, will speak at the detail level about our Pan-African outlook, what we imagine as the South African state being part of your 55 African Union state, what we imagine as South Africa as it relates to our developmental trajectory, the advancement of the AU's Agenda 2063, and the deepening of your 7 aspirations that seeks to define ourselves as African people. When we speak about South-to-South solidarity, of course, evidently, ladies and gentlemen, we speak about a amplified consensus from the democratic state that we should at all times err the side of the most vulnerable and the poor. So when we speak about the plight, for example, of the people of Palestine, that has been a recipient of occupying force since the time of the 1967 border dispute. When we speak about the fact that in Africa, we need to be seized with the continued colonization of the people of Western Sahara by one African state in the form of the Kingdom of Morocco. When we speak about the plight of the people of the Bolivarian Republic of Venezuela, and the fact that throughout the past decade, where they had democratic elections, where people have engaged in self-determination, and that self-determination has received reluctance from, in particular, the then US administration. When we speak about the extraterritorial sanctions propelled against the people of Cuba as a result of a socialist, people-centered and people-driven developmental policy outlook, we speak about global solidarity. And these are very key and critical issues, because I hope today's students and the academia will try to assess, to amplify matters about global solidarity. That global solidarity negates from being inwards focused and to continue to seek to aspire to represent the cherished ideals of Nelson Mandela, after which this university correctly so are named. But the third foreign policy priority is VC. It's a key and critical one that imbues us as a democratic state to deepen cooperation between your North and your South. Therefore, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at your more industrialized North and what should be its relations with your underdeveloped South, we look, for example, at the role that the Nordic countries have played, the Scandinavian countries have played in the freedom of South Africa. We look very deep in contemporary Africa, the role that the Nordics are playing in relation to post-conflict development and the African agenda on the silencing of the guns, which is key and critical. That is a part, of course, about the economic relations as it relates to renewable energy, and the fact that just here on the coast, on the east coast of South Africa, one of your biggest gas explorations has been a consortium, amongst others, from Total, from Norway. So we have to look at the role your industrialized North has to play in terms of helping Africa and the global South to resolve its own challenges. The fourth last pillar, ladies and gentlemen, is of course what we'll speak about today, is the centrality of global governance as it relates to advance multilateralism. And I think we are making a point that the global premium institution of multilateralism, which is the United Nations, in particular during the occasion of celebrating what we call UNGA 75, your United Nations General Assembly in 2020, have come under immense and significant relentless attacks as it relates to a sentiment in the world that have advanced what we call unilateralism. Now, I know the students of history and international politics will immediately be able to recall, for example, VC, a topical example of unilateralism. If you can recall the UN Security Council resolution of 1973 that have ultimately been abused by the world superpowers to result in the destruction of Libya as a state, that have ultimately led to the killing of Colonel Gaddafi. I think you will appreciate the centrality of unilateralism. When we speak, for example, about the fact that in Africa, we are advancing what is called the complementary and subsidiary role that your regional economic communities have to play in relation to their own regions, in relation to the African Union's Peace and Security Council, and what should be that defined relations with the UN Security Council. We speak about the fact, we see that we must negate from a temptation where the UN Security Council intervene in the plight of the African people without confirming the complementary and subsidiary role that should be in existence between the AU's Peace and Security Council, her regional economic communities, and the broader mandate around peace and security of the UN Security Council. But importantly, ladies and gentlemen, when we speak about multilateralism and the transformation of global governance, I think I would fail if we don't contextualize some of the contemporary challenges that we are faced with. So when South Africa was elected as a member of the non-permanent community of the UN Security Council, we, of course, ladies and gentlemen, are very idealistic. And we had a very ambitious program. But may I say that, and we'll reflect on some of the key achievements during our tenureship. But it is our submission as a democratic state in South Africa that what is pivotal when we want to deepen multilateralism is for the transformation of this apex body of the UN, which regulate the conduct and the posture of member states as it relates to peace and development is concerned. Because the UN Security Council, ladies and gentlemen, key mandate is not only to resolve conflict, to look at stability, but it has a concomitant function as it relates to the development orientation of the UN as a supreme body. Now, what we want to submit as a problem statement is the fact that the UN Security Council comprises of 15 members. 10 of those members, ladies and gentlemen, is what we call non-permanent rotating Security Council members. And we'll talk about that. And then you have the 5 global figures who is categorized as the P5 that has a permanent seat around the table to provide custodianship on peace and development of the entirety of the world. So when we as South Africa says that the UN Security Council must be transformed by advancing the Surti Declaration and the Isolweni Consensus, which amongst others says that Africa must have a permanent presence at the level of the UN Security Council. We do it, ladies and gentlemen, understanding the realization of having an Africa that are represented every second year on the UN Security Council. And that representation that is very ad hoc does not allow for consistency. For example, when South Africa assumed our membership at the UN Security Council in 2019, we had at that stage, ladies and gentlemen, Equatorial Guinea and Cote d'Ivoire that serve with South Africa in a capacity what is called the A3. Those three African countries, generally in political terms at the diplomatic level, gets referred to as the A3. Subsequent to that, South Africa then continued to serve with Niger and Tunisia in 2020 as members of the A3. And as we are speaking in 2021, South Africa has then been replaced by Kenya as a member of the A3. So you have Tunisia, you have Niger, and you have Kenya. So what that represents, ladies and gentlemen, is a policy dispositioning where you don't have a certainty about African views every time that African states individually get elected as members of the UN Security Council. And it's a dichotomy. It's a dichotomy because African states they are not obligated to represent the interests of the African Union when they become members of the Security Council. And there's a number of examples that history students would be able to narrate on what the inconsistency means for all of us. So the transformation of the UN Security Council is a paramount issue, and I hope that we have been able to clarify why exactly we say that. The second issue, ladies and gentlemen, is of course, during our Security Council tenure, we have managed to ensure that your superpowers, and when I say superpowers in this context, I speak about the P5. So the superpowers in terms of our language, I speak about the P5 because those are the 5 permanent members that are having representation on the Security Council. We managed to ensure there's a broad substantive agreement that any intervention in the affairs of African states, there must be a mechanism of coordination between the African Union's Peace and Security Council, your regional communities, and the UN Security Council. And that is quite significant, ladies and gentlemen, given, for example, the challenges that I have raised about how Libya has been destabilized through the intervention at that stage by NATO, which was sanctioned by Resolution 1973 of the UN Security Council. The third issue, ladies and gentlemen, is the centrality of women in peace and security in terms of our peace building agenda. I think everyone VC will appreciate that women are, when we speak about internally displaced people in Africa because of conflicts, when we speak about abuse of human rights, the mirror image that presents that abuse is women in Africa as a result of the peace and security challenges that we are faced with. The last issue that I wish to raise as it relates to the UN Security, our UN Security Council tenure, ladies and gentlemen, was a decision of a deeper and closer cooperation between the UN as the primary multilateral organization of the world and the African Union as the apex organization of the African people. So therefore, ladies and gentlemen, one of the resolutions that came to the fore was that, for example, your funding of peacekeeping missions. So whether we speak about the peacekeeping mission in the Democratic Republic of Congo, whether you speak about the African Peace Mission in the Central African Republic, those peace missions, because of the emphasis during our Security Council tenure, is no more just an obligation from the AU and the African states affected, but it gets what you call cross-funding from even the United Nations. So at the level of the UN Security Council, that is what I thought should be our submission today. And then as I gallop towards the realization that it is Africa Month VC, we had the privilege to chair the African Union under very difficult circumstances. Of course, our thematic approach under the stewardship of President Ramaphosa, our theme for our chairpersonship of the African Union, ladies and gentlemen, was the cessation of hostilities on the African continent. So the silencing of the guns was our key thematic approach. And our sub-theme, concurrently so, has been the realization that development cannot happen without the stemification of conflict in the African continent. During our tenureship, unfortunately, Vice Chancellor, we were confronted with this transnational pandemic called COVID-19. But importantly, what we have done, one of our priorities during the AU has been to ensure the African Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes a reality. And on behalf of the South African state, I can account today that as of the 1st of January 2021, the ACFTA came operational, with it being ratified by 54 member states of the African Union. It therefore then says, ladies and gentlemen, when we try to reimagine your post-COVID-19 economic recovery, a center instrument for that post-COVID-19 economic recovery is your African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And why do I say so, Vice Chancellor? For a very simplified reason. If you look at one of our national priorities, we say we need to grow the economy by 6%, isn't it so? To reduce unemployment and poverty, and to narrow the gap in terms of inequality. Before COVID-19, ladies and gentlemen, we had an economic growth that averaged 1.6%. Now, to reimagine a post-COVID-19 economic dispensation should be done being cognizant about the 6% economic growth. And our submission as government is that your free trade agreement, it presents an opportunity, ladies and gentlemen, to harness the economic potential of the entire African states to the tune of $1.4 trillion US. So if we want to reduce our unemployment in South Africa, we must then be able to ensure that your Continental Free Trade Agreement becomes a reality. When we want to reimagine industrialization, productive assets, it must be done, for example, in partnership with some of your other biggest economies, such as Kenya, Egypt, the DRC, Nigeria, You can't do that without that type of realization. The second issue during our chairpersonship, ladies and gentlemen, that we have said we need to do, I think substantively have been achieved, is to deepen cooperation between the African Union and the United Nations. Substantively, it has been achieved. And I've raised a number of issues earlier about the substantive nature about reconfiguration of the international arena under the stewardship of South Africa's chairpersonship. Therefore, the ACFTA has been received by acclamation by the superpowers, through acclamation. The P5 has, through acclamation, says that our agenda of the African Union, which is priority 3, of deepening governance and democracy, it has received high endorsement, because South Africa, ladies and gentlemen, if you can recall it, is the key chief proponent of the African peer review mechanism, your APRM. We are one of the first African states that submitted what we call even a voluntary review report on APRM, but also on the attainment of your sustainable development goals in the entirety of the world. Your fourth priority, ladies and gentlemen, have suffered as a result of the COVID-19 dispensation. It has suffered. And that is our challenges around the economic and financial inclusion of women, the empowerment of women on the African continent. It has suffered. And that's why South Africa VC has committed to continue to pursue those priorities that we have highlighted in terms of the African Union's chairpersonship during 2020. Because in South Africa, there's an issue of gender parity. But I suppose a number of students will recognize the fact that gender parity, how we foresee it through the South African state, the optics of some of our peers elsewhere in Africa is completely different as it relates to the empowerment of women is concerned. And we are saying to you as South Africa that that is one of the key areas upon which there needs to be recalibration. The last issue, Vice Chancellor, that I wish to raise with, of course, the necessary pain and dismay is the fact that the cessation of hostilities and conflict, the silencing of the guns, has not necessarily been achieved at a substantive level. It has not been. And I think it was Rosa Luxemburg that says, to tell the truth is revolutionary, isn't it so? To tell the truth is revolutionary. The first issue, I think students here must have appreciated the ongoing challenges as it relates to, in particular, northern Mozambique is concerned, Cabo Delgado province, which has been a recipient of challenges as it relates to conflict is concerned, the roles of course, your Islamic State broadly will have to be dissected as it relates to those issues is concerned. The role of underdevelopment in that area of Mozambique, of course, will have to be dissected at a very detailed level. So, but primary, VC, the primary reason, ladies and gentlemen, of that conflict is because of political economy. That's the primary reason. So in the northern part of Mozambique and Cabo Delgado, it's not necessarily an intrastate conflict or interstate conflict. It's a conflict that are fueled by greed. And that greed is purported not necessarily by the Zimbabwean people, but by what we call non-state actors and state actors outside of the continent. So the question about your liquid fuel gas is an important issue to look at. Who have interest in liquid fuel gas? Who is permanently in a proper reconfiguration in Mozambique, and who wants to get in? But who wants to get in a manner that is parallel to the official structures of the economic dispensation in Mozambique? And I'm raising it, colleagues, because we have been unsuccessful to ensure, for example, the conflict in the east of the Democratic Republic of Congo, in Goma, in the North Kivu province. It's a conflict that is consistent, long-lasting, albeit having the biggest peacekeeping force of the world there. MONUSCO, the biggest peacekeeping force in the DRC. We have not been able to ensure there's a silencing of the guns there. And again, the same narrative, ladies and gentlemen, that I've presented on Mozambique is the same narrative as it relates to DRC. It's not necessarily about ethnic conflict. It's about political economy. For example, VC, all of us use cellular phones, iPads, laptops, tablets. And one of your key minerals in the world, not in Africa, one of your key minerals that provides optimum functioning of your laptops, your iPads, comes from the DRC in the form of cobalt. So when we look at conflicts in any other area, you look at the Sahel, you look at the Great Lakes region, you look at Libya with the gas and the oil issue. What students of history and on economics must dissect is not to look at what people say is the problem, but for you to look at what is the illusion of the problem, because it's illusion. Don't tell me there's a problem of ethnic conflict in the DRC when that is presented as an illusion, so that ordinary people should not look at and see the real reason why there's a conflict. Because before the discovery of gas in Mozambique, there was no problem about underdevelopment in the northern part, in Cabo Delgado. There was no problem, no debates around it. But namhlanje, because there's liquid gas, there's a problem of international actors that have an interest in Mozambique. So I'm raising it, VC, because as students of history, as students of politics and of developmental economics, this is issues on an everyday basis that the South African government, on your behalf, are executing. Of course, I have made a promise to the Vice Chancellor in private that I'll, of course, pose just 2 or 3 questions. And remember, in diplomatic terms, these questions presents ordinarily matters that I don't have an opinion of. So I hope there's students here that understands tools of analysis to appreciate what I've said, you know. The first question is that when we look at VC, the transformation of the, in particular, UN Security Council, why is it that some of the allies of South Africa, remember there's a P5, isn't it so? There is, Russia is there, China is there, isn't it so? So anyone will tell you they are part of the BRICS forte. So it's allies of the South African state. are we on the same level with the understanding of Africa VC, that Africa must have a permanent representation around the UN Security Council? So is there a statement of intent from Russia, from China, that Uguti, they agree with Africa on the Surti Declaration and the Zolweni Consensus? I'm raising it because those are issues I have told the VC that I don't necessarily have the answers to. The second issue, ladies and gentlemen, when we look at the African Union and the centrality of the African Union, and we speak today in the media, you see the national grievance around the plight of the Palestinian people, isn't it so? The attack by the occupying force as it relates to the plight of to besiege the West Bank, Gaza. It's contemporary. But why is it, ladies and gentlemen, that type of national grievance doesn't become an African grievance as it relates to the plight of the people of Western Sahara is concerned? I've told you, Western Sahara is the only country that are still colonialized. But the problem of Western Sahara is not colonized by the British. It's colonized by the Kingdom of Morocco, who is a member state to the African Union. Why is it that there's no national grievance about the colonialization of the people of Western Sahara? I'm raising it as key and critical issues. The last issue, and this is probably a positive question that I want to raise, Vice Chancellor, is it correct? Is it correct that the United States of America, who at the historic level has been a proponent of unilateralism, is it correct that the current administration of President Biden should be looked at through the same optics like the immediate distant past? Why do I raise it, ladies and gentlemen? I'm raising it because the TRIPS waiver to ensure that there's a universal access on the production of COVID-19 vaccines has been fueled by a decision made after consistent hard work by President Ramaphosa as the champion, African Union champion of COVID-19. After a consistent engagement since the time that President Biden came into power, last week, Thursday, he made the political statement that the United States of America is forfeiting their original position around vaccine nationalism and are agreeing that at the level of the World Trade Organization, the intellectual disparity rights around the TRIPS matter should be temporarily waived to allow for this international crisis. Now I'm asking the optics through which students of history and economics have looked at the US. Should we use the same lenses? Could it be that this type of quite significant policy decisions is a realization of the American people about the importance and the centrality of multilateralism in the world? Having said that, thank you very much, Professor Mkhize.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. Fortunately, today I'm not wearing my historian hat. We will leave the expertise to our two experts, Dr. Stembile Mbete and Dr. Philani Mthembu. Dr. Philani Mthembu is attending virtually, so at some point we will switch. The technical team will help us switch so that we can see them. I just want to acknowledge that there are questions flowing already, just so you know, and I'm getting them all on my other device there. So I will read those out once the opportunity comes. I just want to introduce the first expert discussant, to Dr. Mbete. Dr. Stembile Mbete is a senior lecturer in the Department of Political Sciences at the University of Pretoria, where she teaches international relations and South African politics. She's a visiting researcher at the African Leadership Center at King's College in London, and also serves on the Council of Private Security Industry Regulatory Authority, and is a member of the Ministerial Advisory Committee on the Electoral System. Since March 2021, she has served as Program Director of the Apolitical Academy of Southern Africa Public Service Fellowship. Dr. Mbete completed her PhD in International Relations at the University of Pretoria in 2018 with a thesis titled The Middle Power Debate Revisited, South Africa in the UN Security Council 2007-2008 and 2011 to 2012. She completed her undergraduate up to master's degree at the University of Cape Town, and in 2014 was a visiting scholar at the Department of Political Science at Balselli School of International Affairs at the University of Waterloo in Canada. Her research has been funded by the National Institute for the Humanities and Social Sciences, the National Research Foundation, the Social Science Research Council, and the Mellon Foundation. She's a primary investigator in a Ford Foundation-funded project on the politics of inequality in Southern Africa, and a researcher in a Swedish Research Council-funded project on women, peace, and security agenda in the United Nations Security Council. In 2019, she was an OSF South Africa Democracy Fellow for research on the South African electoral system. She comments frequently, and we have seen her on a range of political issues in South Africa and in South African and international media, including Al Jazeera, BBC World News, ENCA, Voice of America, SABC, the New York Times, the Mail and Guardian, Kaya FM, and we also have seen her on The Daily Show with Trevor Noah. Dr. Mbete joined the University of Pretoria from the presidency of South Africa, where she was a researcher in the Secretariat of the National Planning Commission. She contributed to the drafting of the National Development Plan in the areas of public service reform, anti-corruption policy, and community safety. With that, I welcome you, Dr. Mbete, for your response.
Thank you very much, Professor Mkhize, for that very generous welcome. Deputy Minister Alvin Botha, Vice Chancellor Prof. Mutwa, and everybody who is joining us today, all protocol observed, thank you so much for inviting me to be a discussant at this event on a very important topic in the world, and I think particularly in this time of COVID-19, celebrating multilateralism and South Africa's role on the United Nations Security Council and the chairship of the African Union. Thank you so much for your opening address, Deputy Minister, because you touched on so many issues around the importance of deepening multilateralism and South Africa's efforts in that regard, particularly in this time of where the primary actors in international relations are no longer states. I mean, what we've seen in the field of global health governance around COVID-19, that we've had the importance of an organization like the World Health Organization, regional organizations like the AU, but then also the primary importance of international philanthropists, Bill Gates and his influence on global health policy, the different pharmaceutical companies that are producing vaccines. And so in this world where there is such a diversity of actors, it becomes very important for a country like South Africa to have agility, to have focus and expertise in the way that it approaches its international relations. Thank you also for highlighting the Pan-African outlook of South Africa, which, as I will be speaking about in just a bit, has been reflected in the way in which South Africa led the AU in 2020 in responding to the COVID-19 pandemic. And in many ways, the AU was unique in its multilateral approach to addressing COVID-19 compared to other regional organizations like the EU, like ASEAN, etc. And then finally, the issues that you raised around UN Security Council reform, and that question is a very important question about why our BRICS allies are not more vocal in their support of Security Council reform and having a permanent African seat on the Security Council, I think is very important. And then finally, actually, the final point that you highlighted, which I think was very important, is around the African Continental Free Trade Agreement and the important links between development and peace and security, and how important it is for Africa, which is the region in the world that has the least amount of intracontinental or intra-regional trade, how important the Continental Free Trade Agreement is to African development and to us really taking our rightful place in the world. And so, building off what the Deputy Minister was speaking about today, I would like to highlight three areas of focus, in particular, looking firstly at South Africa's time in the UN Security Council in 2019 and 2020, and then looking at South Africa's chairship of the AU in 2020. And I am timing myself, so I'm going to try and get this in 15 minutes. But, as Prof. Mkhize said, I did my PhD analyzing and looking at South Africa's first two terms in the Security Council in 2007, 2008, and 2011 and 2012. And one of the main insights or a big takeaway for me in the course of my PhD research is the point that Prof. Mutwa made earlier about how it is important to reveal these truths to ourselves. That an important part of decolonization is knowing about yourself and knowing about yourself from your own perspective, because those of us who were colonized, our knowledge creation and our knowledge of ourselves is brought externally. And I realized how true that was of South African foreign policy. So because many South African media outlets don't have experts in foreign policy working for them, it's not an issue that many of our journalists are trained in. So much of the information we get as South Africans about South African foreign policy decisions comes from overseas media. It comes from foreign media outlets that in syndicated pieces in our media. So reading up about South Africa's positions on issues like Myanmar in 2007 or Zimbabwe in 2008, Libya, Syria, 2011 and 2012. So much of the filter through which we get that information as South Africans is a Western one. It's pieces syndicated from the New York Times, the Washington Post, translated pieces from Le Monde, piece from The Guardian. And what that means is that so much of what we understand of what South Africa is in the world is not from our own perspective, it's other people looking at us. And so it's that issue really is one of the things that continues my passion for for international relations and for analyzing South African foreign policy. So firstly, I want to look at South Africa and the UN Security Council, and I want to briefly raise 3 issues about what was so, about some of the achievements of South Africa in our time in the Security Council in 2019 and 2020. Firstly, as the Deputy Minister mentioned, in 2019, we were on the Security Council with Cote d'Ivoire and Equatorial Guinea. In 2020, we were on the Council with Niger and Tunisia. And one of the great achievements of all, particularly in 2019, was the formalization of the relationship between the A3 of the Security Council, the 3 elected African members. And we saw in 2019, I think it was 16 joint statements that were made by the A3 on a range of issues, and real coordination and cooperation to put forward a common African position and an African agenda on important African issues in the Council, including the response to the election in the DRC in January of 2019, the response to the overthrowing of the president of Sudan, the response to the peace process in South Sudan, etc. And what this did, this common African position and this common cooperation amongst African countries, is that it disempowered the permanent 5 members and other members of the Security Council from using from using a divide and rule strategy of creating divisions amongst African states in order to be able to influence responses to African conflicts. What we saw in particular that was really interesting in 2020 was the addition to the A3, which included Niger and Tunisia and South Africa, of St. Vincent and the Grenadines, which is a small Caribbean island that is traditionally an ally of the United States and relies greatly on the United States for its economic well-being, but really found itself and St. Vincent and the Grenadines started taking common positions with the A3 in a number of areas throughout 2020. And when they were asked why they were doing this, the ambassador is an incredible formidable woman diplomat, and she said, well, because before we are anything else, we are a Black country. We are a country of the African diaspora, and the issues of African people in the world are important to us. And for as long as Africa has a low status in the world, so do we. And so this instance of diasporic cooperation, I think, was a really important feature of South Africa's time in most recent time in the UN Security Council. Second thing I want to touch on, which the Deputy Minister spoke about, is South Africa's efforts over time in increasing the cooperation between the African Union Peace and Security Council and the United Nations Security Council on African peace and security issues. And this is an issue that South Africa has pursued consistently since its first tenure in the Security Council in 2007 and 2008. And indeed, in 2007, and 8, when South Africa was lobbying that you need to have the UN Security Council consult with the AU Peace and Security Council around African peace and security issues, which make up 70% of the issues on the UN Security Council agenda. This culminated in 2008 with Resolution 1809 that put in place a system of regular meetings, annual meetings between the UN Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council that alternate between New York and Addis Ababa. And last year in August 2020, the 14th annual meeting between the AU Peace and Security Council and the UN Security Council took place. And so this is an initiative of South Africa's from 2007 that was institutionalized in 2008 with Resolution 1809 under President Mbeki. It was further institutionalized with Resolution 2033 under President Zuma in 2012. Which took the cooperation even further around the budgeting issues, as the Deputy Minister had spoken about, in terms of funding UN, AU peacekeeping missions that are mandated by the UN Security Council on the continent. And in 2019 and 2020, the A3 took forward the issue, as the Deputy Minister had said, around the funding of peace missions on the continent, including in 2019 by the 3 permanent representatives of South Africa, Cote d'Ivoire, and Equatorial Guinea, going on a visit to Washington, DC to go lobby American policymakers around this issue because of the obstructiveness of the US government in this regard. And so that kind of cooperation continentally, I think, is something that South Africa can be proud of. And then finally, in relation to the UN Security Council, what we have seen, and it's part of the discussion that we are meant to be having today, is South Africa's role within the non-aligned movement in the UN generally, and how that has played out in South Africa's work in the UN Security Council. And so what we saw in 2019 and 2020, South Africa, another non-aligned movement country that was on the council that South Africa works very closely with is Indonesia. And South Africa and Indonesia were both in the UN Security Council in 2007 and 2008, and they were again in the council together in 2019 and 2020. And in both terms, South Africa and Indonesia took common positions and cooperated on issues that are important to the NAM, central amongst those the plight of Palestinians under Israeli occupation. And certainly in 2019, in July 2019, Indonesia and South Africa co-sponsored a draft press statement, which is one of the outcomes that the UN Security Council can produce, that condemned settlement building and which highlighted the rights of the Palestinian people. And that press statement was not adopted by the UN Security Council because of the intervention of the United States. In 2020, once Kuwait had joined, so in 2019, South Africa, Indonesia, and Kuwait worked together on the issue of Palestinian rights. And in 2020, Indonesia and South Africa were joined by Tunisia in this effort, and really the efforts to bring to life Resolution 2334 of 2016, which is the UN Security Council resolution condemning the Israeli settlement building program and calling for recognition of the Palestinians' right to statehood. And so with South Africa's leadership in the Security Council as part of NAM on the issue of Palestine, one does hope that we will get a far more stringent response from our government to the horrors that we have been seeing in the past few days. Indeed, in his statement about the NEC meeting on Monday, President Ramaphosa mentioned South Africa's solidarity with the Irish people and our solidarity and the ANC solidarity with Sinn Féin in Northern Ireland, and indeed the Republic of Ireland. Yesterday, the foreign minister of the Republic of Ireland called in the Israeli ambassador in Ireland to convey Ireland's condemnation of Israel's actions and to have him explain what was going on. And this really is something that South Africa needs to be doing, to call in the Israeli ambassador at the threat of severing ties between Israel and South Africa, because it is completely unconscionable that we sit back and watch just what is going on in Palestine. So South Africa, as a country that has taken such leadership on this issue in the UN Security Council as part of NAN, even when we are not in the council, we have a responsibility to behave consistently on this issue. And then finally, I want to just talk about South Africa's time in the as AU chair. And the COVID-19 response and leading the COVID-19 responses. And as I said, the African Union was really unique amongst regional organizations in terms of taking a multilateral approach. And the AU led or took a multilateral response to COVID-19 in a number of ways. Firstly, in terms of coordination and standard setting, the Africa CDC, which South Africa has been a very big supporter of over time, took a great role in terms of sharing expertise, knowledge sharing with AU member states, providing technical support, and making sure that we expedited things like the procurement of masks and sanitizers, and equipping other African states to be able to manage working with the CDC and empowering the CDC to provide technical support to all African states. Public agenda setting was a role that South Africa really guided and in its time at the helm of the AU, and also mobilizing resources to be able to empower African governments to address the pandemic of COVID-19. And I think that what we have seen is the result, the very positive result of that kind of multilateral mobilization on a regional level. And one hopes that we continue as a region to work with each other in that way, because certainly when we talk about multilateralism, we're not just talking globally, but I think that it is very important for us to think about it regionally. And the challenges that are going to keep facing us in the 21st century, and this is an important point for all of you who are students here. In my first year of university, 2003, I remember sitting in the Res Common Room watching the invasion of Iraq on CNN. And if you had told me then that the war would still be going on 18 years later, I would have said you are mad. For all of you young people who are here, who are undergraduate students, the invasion of Iraq that you have been watching live has been COVID-19. And the rest of your adulthood is going to be defined by constant pandemics. This is not the first one you're going to deal with, and the climate crisis. And those are issues that can only be solved multilaterally, collaboratively. They can't be fixed by any country on its own. And so with that, I want to thank you very much for listening to me and for inviting me here today. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Dr. Mbete, and for remaining provocative as the Vice Chancellor and the Deputy Minister have kind of set that kind of tone. What will happen now is we're going to switch to the virtual platform. So just move, if you can ease with that. I'm going to switch to the virtual platform. I'm going to introduce Dr. Mthembu first, and then we'll ease to the virtual platform. Then what we will do is I will ask the guests, just for your comfort, that we're going to move these chairs behind so that you don't have to turn to see him. Yeah, so that's why the chairs were brought in. Let me just introduce the guest, and then we will switch to the virtual. Dr. Philani Mthembu is the Executive Director at the Institute for Global Dialogue. Prior to joining the Institute for Global Dialogue associated with UNISA, Dr. Mthembu pursued a joint doctoral program with the Graduate School of Global Politics at Freie Universität Berlin in Germany and the School of International Studies at Renmin University, Beijing, China. He conducted his field research at the latter. The focus of his dissertation was on the rise of emerging powers as sources of development cooperation in Africa. The study was essentially a comparative analysis of the determinants of development cooperation in Africa using qualitative method analysis, for which he was awarded the degree magna cum laude. During his time abroad, he co-founded the Berlin Forum on Global Politics, a non-profit organization dedicated to the promotion of academic, expert, and public understanding of global politics. He is an alumnus of the Managing Global Governance Program established by the German Federal Ministry of Economic Cooperation and Development, designed for young professionals from emerging economies. As an expert, he has actively participated in various international conferences, symposia, and workshops related to global politics. He received his MA in International Relations at the University of Witwatersrand at Wits, where he headed the academic development program for first-year students and was elected an independent candidate for the SRC. So we do have quite strong lineage of youth formations from the minister through our experts. So we will switch now as we just move the chairs for the panelists.
Greetings, colleagues. I'm just waiting for the host to allow me to put my video on. Thank you, colleagues. So I think what I'll do is I'll immediately just start with my discussion points while the host tries to switch my video on. I hope that is in order. Otherwise, you'll let me know via the chat. Colleagues, I think it's been really great, firstly, listening in to the inputs. I need to first say thank you to the Deputy Minister, and also to thank the Vice Chancellor, and thank DIRCO and Nelson Mandela University for organizing this discussion. I think it's very important because when we look at a country like South Africa, we are looking at a country with one of the biggest diplomatic footprints in the world, especially for a country its size. But not only in terms of South Africa's presence in the world, but also in terms of the world's presence in South Africa. So the global diplomatic footprint in South Africa. And it is in that context that I've titled my discussion points, South Africa's role in a changing African and multilateral landscape. It really has 4 key points. It's an overview on the importance of public diplomacy and the elevation of international relations in the South African landscape. My second point will really be on the state of multilateralism and international cooperation and the challenge of overcoming the urge. Sorry, I had an echo in my audio. I hope that's resolved also on your side. The second point was really on the state of multilateralism and international cooperation and the importance of overcoming the urge towards narrow nationalism. The third point is really around the UN and enhancing coordination between the Security Council and the AU's Peace and Security Council, especially in funding of peace and security and ensuring that development remains at the center of international relations. The fourth point is really around the African Continental Free Trade Area and coordinating a Pan-African and global response on COVID-19. And then I'll just set out the 3 key points looking forward. So colleagues, I think really the importance of public diplomacy and the elevation of international relations points to the closing the gap between domestic dynamics and international relations. I think as a country like South Africa, as a country of our size and the role that we play not only in Africa, but also in the global South, it is very important that international relations is not something that is in the periphery. It is not something that is only discussed amongst the so-called elites or elite institutions. It is absolutely important that we have an outward-looking gaze when we think about international relations. And therefore, what I mean is that each and every, irrespective of the faculty that one is in, whether one is studying economics, whether one is studying engineering, whether one is studying the arts, I think it's important to inculcate an international relations outlook in all of that. Because however we are equipping and skilling the new generation in South Africa, it's important that they understand that the skills that they are receiving, they will have to apply them within an international environment. They will also be competing for the application of their skills and ideas within an international environment. So that is the first point. And I think that's why it's important to have such outreach programs when it comes to public diplomacy, because it does elevate the role of international relations and brings it more central within our national discourse. And of course, there's a history also to this. We know that even in attaining our own liberation and in attaining our own democracy, we know that former President O.R. Tambo had to establish an external mission of the African National Congress and had to engage the international community not only at a state level, but also at a non-state level, which means that even in countries which did not formally support South Africa's liberation, is that it was important to establish ties with non-state actors in those countries so that you would actually drive pressure from below. And that pressure would be applied to their governments. So that's the first point. The second point is really about the state of multilateralism, and that we are in a period of time where countries like South Africa must step up to avoid a situation where the world is divided along geopolitical lines, which then hinders global development. And what is important there is about overcoming the urge towards narrow nationalism. Because what we have seen, not only with the COVID response, but also what we have seen prior to this particular pandemic, is that the multilateral system already prior to the pandemic was in ICU. It was a precarious situation where some of the global powers that played a key role in the establishment of the current multilateral order were actually pulling back or establishing alternative mechanisms of cooperation. And those mechanisms were quite exclusive and avoided interaction and taking up inputs, especially and concerns from the global South. And therefore, in a period like this, where multilateralism is actually not in a good state, it is important for countries like South Africa to galvanize their regions, to galvanize fellow countries within the global South, to actually uphold the key pillars of a multilateral order. The third point is really around the importance, and this came out also with the Deputy Minister's address, of enhancing coordination between the UN Security Council and the African Union Peace and Security Council. It's absolutely important, but even more important than the coordination is to continue our efforts at ensuring a steady funding stream for African peace and security operations, but also to ensure that development remains at the center of the UN system. Because if the key business of the UN Security Council, as Dr. Mbete said, if 70% of the business of the UN Security Council is situated in Africa, then it is absolutely important that there is greater coordination, but that also there is a steady stream of funding for African peace and security operations. And this is something that has been consistent in the various terms that South Africa has served within the UN Security Council. The fourth point really around the AU is really the importance of the continental free trade area, and to acknowledge that already the operationalization of the continental free trade area shows a higher degree of commitment from African stakeholders towards regional integration. But it also shows a greater awareness that if Africa is to actually succeed in the global economy, if Africa is to provide for a population that would have doubled by the year 2050, if Africa is to provide decent jobs, decent livelihoods, it is absolutely important for our strategic interests to support the regional integration agenda and to give the African Continental Free Trade Area all the support that it would require, which means that countries like South Africa would also have to continue their efforts to actually lead regional integration, but to ensure that regional integration is also done in a developmental manner. a developmental manner that takes into account the varying interests and the varying dynamics that exist within Africa's political economy. And the larger states on the continent should lead in terms of the type of concessions they are willing to make for the broader good of integrating the continent. A second point related to that is the important role that South Africa played throughout its term in the African Union in coordinating a Pan-African response to COVID-19. And that Pan-African response drew on Africa's existing capabilities and Africa's existing experience in dealing with pandemics and in dealing with epidemics. I think the world underestimated the capacity of the continent, and the continent showed a greater resilience than was actually expected. But at the same time, I think we shouldn't take for granted that as AU chair, it was absolutely vital that South Africa coordinated a Pan-African response, because in the absence of that, we would have had all African countries essentially going at it alone. And we would have found ourselves even further at the back of the line when it comes to the global supply chains. So that was absolutely important. And what was also important, I think, is complementing that with a global response in terms of the South African and the Indian position within the World Trade Organization. Because the push to have and enforce a TRIPS waiver is something that has galvanized not only the African continent, but has galvanized the international community, and not only at a state level, but also at a non-state level. So it's absolutely important for South Africa to identify actors not only in the global south, but also actors in the global north, who actually share South Africa's progressive positions when it comes to intellectual property rights, especially in the midst of a pandemic. Looking ahead, there's really three key areas which I won't go into too much. It's going to be important for South Africa and its partners on the continent to assess the existing capabilities at a national and a regional level, not only among state actors, but also amongst non-state actors. This will assist the country to build complementarities and allow non-state actors to support the state's own actions where the state falls short when it comes to capacities. And this dialogue taking place at a university, one could imagine, for instance, greater support for the work of the state when it comes to research and policy, and drawing on the intellectual capital that the country possesses amongst its 26 universities, but equally amongst civil society organizations and amongst think tanks within the country. Second point is really around building regional cooperation mechanisms as a bridge in strengthening the multilateral system. It's absolutely important that South Africa continues to support regional mechanisms of cooperation that are aligned to international best practices. And in the absence of strong regional cooperation mechanisms, we have seen that people revert back to the nation state and revert to narrow nationalism. The last point is really about building resilient regional value chains and ensuring that we continue to prioritize the building and establishment of resilient regional value chains. It's an area that we were shown to be relatively weak in as a continent at the onset of the pandemic, as we had to queue at the back of the international line to wait for the supply of vital medicines and vital PPEs that would assist our countries in order to deal with the pandemic. And as Dr. Mbete said, this will not be the last pandemic. And it is important that when the next pandemic finds us, it finds us at a position where the continent has spearheaded the initiative of building resilient value chains. And that is something that will be catalyzed by the Continental Free Trade Area. And with those remarks, thank you, colleagues.
Minister, the questions, I have never seen so many questions coming in. I am struggling with the number of questions, so we'll have to make some choices when the question and answer session comes. I just want to add that Dr. Mthembu has been quite prolific in his publications and has recently produced a sole-authored book titled China and India's Development Cooperation in Africa, the Rise of Southern Powers, as well as a co-edited book titled From MDGs to Sustainable Development Goals, The Travails of International Development, and many other publications. So really our young up and coming, not up and coming, but like, you know, generational change. It's happening at a very high level now. So with that, I would like, in terms of generational change, to invite our first student respondent, Ubuntu Mnyaga, who is a Nelson Mandela University student and also a wonderful member, assistant member in our Department of History and Political Studies. Buntu recently graduated with his master's in conflict management and transformation at Nelson Mandela University, focusing on the influence of social conflict on social cohesion. He has served in various positions of the United Nations Association of South Africa's student chapter. He has received experiential training from DIRCO itself, focusing on foreign policy, economic diplomacy, and public speaking. He has also participated and trained participants for the Model United Nations Conference and was part of the delegation to the Beirut Model United Nations in Lebanon and All African Students Association Conference in Ghana. Buntu Mnyaga is passionate about internationalization, higher education, diplomacy, conflict resolution, and social cohesion. And he's currently employed at the Office for Institutional Strategy at Nelson Mandela University as a research assistant. So welcome, Mr. Mnyaga. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. The difficulty of following after such speakers is that you are summarized. And I'll try not to sound summarized. I'll try reinvent what I've said. Trust me, this is not a lot. I just can't see. I've got the same problem as when I was president of having to have a big font when I read. Sorry. Can I? Okay. Can just, thanks. Before I begin, I would like to thank for the opportunity to be able to speak and to be a respondent. For some of us, it's been a pipe dream, a dream, in fact, to have the opportunity to have DIRCO come to Nelson Mandela University. We have had, in my time being part of UNASA, a number of meetings trying to convince Mr. Geldenees, who's the talent manager at DIRCO, that in their moving around, they should come around the site. And we truly appreciate those who put together such a program. But I'm not here for that. I've left the stage. So Program Director, Deputy Minister, Irvin Bottas, Vice Chancellor, and DVCs, University Management, and the Dean of the Faculty of Humanities, panelists, student staff, and distinguished guests, ladies and gentlemen. If we start to understand that we're interconnected and belong to a global community, that umntu ngumntu ngabantu, which is a philosophy that we understand as the belief in a universal bond of sharing and connecting and connects all humanity. This is the premise of multilateralism, and this is the form of the foundation of the South African foreign policy. So the white paper of the South African foreign policy, which is titled The Better World, the Diplomacy of Ubuntu, states that we champion collaboration, cooperation, and building partnerships. This recognition of this interconnectedness and interdependency is the infusion of Ubuntu in the South African identity, shapes our foreign policy. This is testament to South Africa's role in the community of nations and building in cooperation and partnership that can be seen through involving the the promotion of peace, human rights, justice, and ensuring stability. However, it's been said that South Africa's role within international relations has dwindled. And this is the result mainly of domestic politics, decreased economic and military capacity, and incidents of xenophobia on other Africans. And this has made South Africa's lose its credibility and legitimacy in international politics. This is bear testament by what former Minister Lindiwe Sisulu once stated, that we were once a giant in the world. Our reputation was well known because of what we represented. We'll regain that stature and put our efforts in making that we make sure the world is a better place. This is the reflection of the minister on the decline and the questionable South Africa's reputation between 2009 and 2018. And for South Africa to reassure itself, it regained, as was said by our speakers, through multilateral institutions such as the UN and the AU. So South Africa got into a campaign and got into the Security Council, and subsequently as well as the chair of the African Union. Program director, I am not going to label myself as an international relations fundi, nor a boffin, as our deputy minister and discussants have classified themselves. As you can see, they are fundis and boffins. My attempt is to pose a few questions that will be thought-provoking to expand the discussion. We've seen through multilateralism that the world has taken strides through the development, through the Universal Declaration of Human Rights, the adoption of the SDGs, which were inclusive in approach and ensured global consensus. If we look closer to home, even the adoption of the Agenda 2063, we have seen that South Africa, during its tenure in the Security Council, the UN priorities, as the minister said, silencing of the gun, focus on women, youth, and peace and security, as well as ensuring that South Africa is at the center of problems. This can be seen case in point through South Africa's involvement in the negotiation between Ethiopia and Egypt on the Grand Ethiopian Renaissance Dam, after the US attempted to mediate between the two countries. Program director, to contribute to the discussion, I pose the following questions. What does it mean for South Africa to be, for its term in the Security Council for ordinary South Africans? What has changed the African Union to the ordinary South African? What are the benefits of these things to change the material conditions of our people? Why should we care about such things? If one notices, my bit of response is focused on national interest in terms of multilateralism. I in no way seek to be labeled narrow, a reductionist, but however seem to echo some of the sentiments of our people. Also, as a young person, I believe I have the responsibility to ask questions that will require elders in the room, and those are older than 35, we've seen lately that as a young person, I have the responsibility to ask questions that seek to require elders in the room to ponder, respond, and attempt to convince us why these things matter, because we are told that these things matter. It is a collective responsibility of those in power to clearly explain to us why these things matter. Otherwise, the perpetuation of right-wing populism and the feeding of chauvinistic nationalism will persist. In the attempt to answer these questions, I have posed myself, and I have personally struggled to allow me to quote Ivan Krosto, the founder of the National Interest. I know it was a conservative newspaper, but I sort of like this quote. It says, power breeds responsibilities in terms of international affairs as in domestic. To dodge and to claim these responsibilities is one form of abuse of power. The national interest of a state is central to international relations and the ability to control global politics. However, for such to be understood, its citizens must know that the state is as much and that they have confidence in the state's ability, that citizens have confidence in the state's ability to ensure that national interest is adhered to for the benefits of the citizens and ensuring global community. I further pose these questions. Do our citizens in the state know South Africa's national interest? And are they confident that the state represents South Africa's national interest in the global stage? I'll leave that to the panelists to ponder and to the minister to respond to. I know, Program Director, I want to answer the questions and pose that I pose and provide my own thoughts. If we were to be confident of our people and understanding their central role of these institutions to contribute to their daily lives, it's important that we bring the institutions to the people and not make them platforms or spaces for the elite, as Dr. Tembu just eloquently stated. This will allow for the people to show interest in the work of these bodies, allowing for greater participation for citizens and civil society to hold government accountable for its mandate. It must also be said that we as a country are polarized, confronted with various issues confronting our state, such as corruption, gender-based violence, poverty, unemployment, and inequality. These have left us to think that as a nation and ourselves, we face challenges that the global world does not face. And these issues of global politics are far-fetched from us because we have to deal with bread and butter issues that confront us every day. But if we're to understand that these challenges that we face, the world and the continent, have been responded to in the sense of the Sustainable Development Goals and Agenda 2063. These seek to ensure a better world and have a consensus of member states through multilateral engagement. As I conclude, because I was given 10 minutes, the question becomes, what is to be done? I just have 3 points. Firstly, government, civil society, and higher education institutions need to work together to educate, promote the importance of international work for South Africa. This is what I said about speaking after, because you are summarized. You see. This will ensure that they're able to hold the government accountable for decision-making in international platforms. This will break the barrier of an elitist mentality when it comes to international work. We need to promote the role of higher education in working with the United Nations and AU. This must not just simply be a tick box exercise. This means that we need to see the consolidation of national interest and aligning with the work of the state, as well as that with these bodies and that of higher education. This must be done through the philosophy of Ubuntu and can empower themselves and empower citizens for a better world. Secondly, the transformation of the United Nations. I'm trying to attempt also, Deputy Minister, to respond to your questions. It seems like I spoke to you beforehand. Particularly the Security Council, to represent the realities of our time, should ensure a fair representation, promoting their fair negotiations and consensus. In my view, I think platforms such as the G20 and mainly the G77 plus China speak to a type of a new UN that we should envision. This is a UN that has a fair representation in the Security Council, not based on colonial imperial notions of global consensus, and found on the principle of consensus. Thirdly, which is also one of my passions, the internalization of higher education must be used as a champion of the values and the national interests of the state, as a response to a bettering of material conditions of our people. I'm of the view that through materialism, the promotion of transdisciplinary would be beneficial for the championing of a better unified world. We have to see this through the various collaboration that we have since taken, since the start of the pandemic. Program Director, as I conclude, I would like to quote Kwame Nkrumah on this month of Africa Month, who stated that it is clear that we must find an African solution to our problems, and that this can be found in African unity. Divided, we are weak. United, Africa could become one of the greatest forces for good in the world. I refer to Kwame Nkrumah because it is well known that the division of African continent along the lines of Anglophone and Francophone normally display themselves in the continent, hindering progress and being able to have a clear collective that can dominate global politics. The unity and cohesiveness of the African continent, in my view, is central to the promotion of multilateralism within the continent. With those being said, those are my responses to the keynote address and the respondents. Thank you very much.
Oh, Mde. Thank you so much, Buntu, for that response that also exemplifies that very strong Africanist rooting of Mandela University students that is accompanied by a great deal of rigor. Very proud of Mandela students for being unapologetically African. With that, I would like to invite our last respondent, who is also a student respondent, Mr. Mishak Mugabe, who is the current president of the South African Union of Students. Mr. Mugabe was the former SRC president at Walter Sisulu University, a former regional chairperson and PEC member of SASCO in the Eastern Cape, a former member of the University Council of Walter Sisulu University. He holds a master's degree in commerce from the University of Fort Hare, our great Pan-African university, and he is currently a PhD student at UNISA. So we will be switching to virtual for Mr. Mugabe. Again, apologies for the problem of network that sometimes arises quite capriciously with Zoom. Those are just some of the gremlins that you deal with, no matter how prepared you are, but we will hopefully be able to get Mr. Mugabe onto the video link.
Thank you very much to the program director. I want to start by acknowledging important dignitaries that are here, the Deputy Minister, Honorable Ivan Botts. We are familiar. We have been interacting in various other platforms. I've got great respect for you because of your internationalist politics, as well as being a great Marxist of note. We learn a lot from you all the time. I want to acknowledge the Vice Chancellor of Nelson Mandela University, Professor Mutwa. She's also the chairperson of all Vice Chancellors in the country. So it's always great to interact in this platform as well as national leaders. But I also want to acknowledge academics that are here present, Dr. Mbete, Professor Maboka, Professor Maseko, Professor Mkize. Academics are very important in shaping the discourse. Without academics, we run a risk of being led by common sense. So they always assist to bring intellectual dynamics to the conversations. But I want to greet the SRC leadership of Nelson Mandela University, Poncho, Mabena, and Bundu, Diabolis. Now, the topic we're dealing with today is a very important topic. And I think the first thing that we have got to do as young people in institutions of higher learning is to ask a question of what kind of Africa and world do we want? And I think as South, we have answered that question already. South African Union of Students have got a position that we want to create a better Africa and a better world. But what is a better Africa and a better world? It is an Africa and a world wherein there are no diseases, there is no poverty, there is no conflict, there is equality. It is a world where there is peace and access to health and education for all the people in the continent and in the world. That's the better Africa and the world that we want. So that's why, and that's what places this topic we're dealing with very, very important. And today we are very happy that we have joined the conversation in celebrating multilateralism, South Africa's role in UN Security Council, and the chairship of the African Union. And this topic has been unpacked properly by the keynote speaker, the Deputy Minister. So we need cooperation among several nations in trade, in commerce, and in politics. So it's very, very important. And I think that one of the milestones which you have mentioned already is the African Continental Free Trade Agreement, which is creating a platform, for Africa to rise to the occasion, because Africa has been missing in terms of cooperation in trade in that process. Because if you look at the GDP of the continent, we're far behind when we look at other continents, and it makes us to be disadvantaged in terms of being competitive and trade in the world. So when we trade amongst ourselves and become stronger, then we become more stronger partners in terms of trading with the world. But I also want to touch a little bit about COVID-19 pandemic to say out of the 15 vaccines, Deputy Minister, that the World Health Organization considers, Africa is a spectator. There is not a single African continent that is a full participant in terms of discovery or development of any of these vaccines. They are coming from other continents, from India, from China, from America, Europe, and so on and so forth. So COVID-19 pandemic, to me, is a reminder that a global South cannot continue to depend on global North, because there is now what we call now vaccine nationalism, which is a very difficult scenario wherein they determine the quantity that they can supply at a particular time despite the demand and the need. And I think that whilst Africans, we are spectators in vaccine development, but we can still play a role in vaccine manufacturing. We can still play a role in trials, clinical trials, and so on and so on. But what is more important, what is more critical for us as students, is that we need, as a continent, to invest in research, technology, and healthcare. I think the COVID-19 have showed us that we need, to invest in the healthcare system, because most of the healthcares in the continent, they have collapsed because of the rise in infections. The hospitals were not able to contain the numbers of people. So we need to invest in our healthcare system. We need to invest in research. We need to invest in technology. But we also need to have a discussion, Deputy Minister and Vice Chancellor and all stakeholders, about the future of disasters, the future of pandemics, or about the future pandemics, in fact, because this has shown us that, we need, to always be mindful of the risks that confront us as a continent and as a world. So we need to be more prepared for the future. And part of that preparation must ensure that Africa in future will not be spectators, but will be at the forefront of development of vaccines. The third point that I want to talk about is the issue of international peace, security, and stability, which is very important and central to the topic we're discussing today. And that is very important because you cannot keep quiet and fold arms when your neighbor is facing threats, because when the terrorists are done with your neighbor, they will look for the next victim, and you would not know who will be the next victim. So it's important to always to be hands-on all the time and participate in creating peace and stability. And currently, I'm sure you are aware of the threats in Mozambique, the insurgency. People are being killed by terrorists in Mozambique. It's very bad what is happening there. But if you go to the other parts of Africa, you will know about Boko Haram, that it has killed 360,000 people since 2009. So that is very bad, for our continent. When we have, terrorist groups that are not able to be contained, they continue to abduct young girls, taking them from school, abducting them, denying them education, these terrorists, and all these activities are informed by economic interests. But how do we ensure that we maintain stability, we maintain peace in the world, in the continent as a starting point, and in the world? I think that the presence of South Africa in the UN is very, very important. But that presence needs to be supported by all African countries and also other friends outside the continent, in the BRICS and elsewhere, to ensure that there is, more a strong voice in addressing issues of, instability and conflict in the continent. But I agree with the keynote speaker here, Comrade Botts, when he talked about solidarity with the people of Palestine, when he talked about solidarity with the people of Western Sahara and the blockages in Venezuela and Cuba. and even blockages in Zimbabwe and Swaziland. We need to deal with that. But I think the central point to that is that we cannot be free when there are other countries that are still facing apartheid colonialism. We cannot be proud every day when there are other people's rights and freedoms, are still being denied. So it's very, very important that because we would not know what will happen tomorrow, and therefore we must also understand the history that the freedoms we enjoy was as a result of the support from other parts of the world. So multilateralism is very, very important, and cooperation is very, very, very important. But the last point I want to make as an emphasis is that what role can we play, what needs to be done to ensure that this African Free Trade Continental Trade Agreement is not just rhetoric, is not just a theoretical framework that we celebrate. We need to celebrate this multilateralism. We need to celebrate, the role in the African Union, specifically this Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement. So we need massive industrialization. That's the first point we are sponsoring to this conversation, that we need massive industrialization as an accompanying factor to this free trade agreement. Because without industrialization, we will not be able to move anywhere, because we will be consumers of materials from other parts of the world, whilst we are suppliers of the raw materials. So we need industrialization so that we strengthen our manufacturing, we produce our own products here in the continent. So the private sector have got to play a role in ensuring that that industrialization is realized. Number two, we need massive infrastructure development. We all know that the problem in Africa is infrastructure. There is no sufficient infrastructure to facilitate trade, to facilitate commerce, and all other important activities. So we need massive infrastructure development as a accompanying factor to this African Continental Free Trade Agreement. And the government must play a role to invest in infrastructure, more investment in infrastructure to facilitate this Africa Free Trade Continental Agreement. And number three, which is the last point, is that we need human capital investment. And this is where our investors must play a role. Why human capital investment? Because as a continent, for us to compete in the world, we need to be competent. Because if we are not competent, we always depend on the other parts of the world. We always depend on Europe. So we need to be competent enough. We must have our own engineers, must have our own experts, in our scientists who are experts, and we need to have our own human capital in all areas. And our investors play that role, and they need to be supported to ensure that there is a proper, competent human capital development for the continent and the world. On that note, I want to thank you very much for inviting me to this conversation, and I look forward to more discussions. Of course, most of the questions that were asked by the Deputy Minister were answered by Bundu when he was on the platform. Mine was just to make a comment in terms of aiding to this discussion. Thank you very much. Over to you, Chair.
Thank you so much, colleagues. As we reach towards the end of our program, it is 1:30, so we are a little bit over time. The Vice Chancellor does have another engagement, so if we could excuse her, she would have obviously loved to stay for the question and answer session, but she must attend to another engagement. As I said, Deputy Minister, there are quite a lot of questions, so we'll be quite selective so we can just get to the essences and get to the end. What I will do now is I will ask the students in the room if there's someone with a burning comment, if I can ask you to make a comment rather than pose a question, rather convey your opinion so that the minister doesn't have to necessarily answer a question because there are already so many questions that came through the Zoom channel. So if there's any student that has a deeply, deeply burning comment, let me know. Then we'll bring the mic. You can just put your hand up. This is the Zoom silence that we normally see on Zoom now. Who will volunteer? No. It's the youth voice. If the youth voice doesn't take up their voice now, they must know they'll never be given their voice. So if you don't take it, you don't take it. What I will do then is I will just take a couple of, just read a couple of the comments for you and then give you just a couple of minutes to just wrap everything up and consolidate. Okay, so one from Giovanni Poggi. The Israeli oppression of Palestinians is the deepest wound inflicted on global human rights that continues unabated into the 21st century. Without America and other former colonial powers changing their stance on Israel's illegal occupation, how will we ever solve this issue? We need to put pressure on America to help negotiate an end to Israeli apartheid. Sia Togoza Mtolo says, to the minister, what or when does South Africa benefit from championing multilateralism? Hard and soft benefits. What has Africa done for South Africa besides illustrate our hypocrisy, powerlessness, and the poverty of our supposedly principled foreign policy stance? Another question. Beauty Mbuwane. Given that states are aware of the instabilities that come with the rotation of non-permanent membership in the UN, is there a chance that other states can propose a review in change of power states where security is concerned without being vetoed? And can we as the African states afford to hold such a position, especially where monetary obligations are concerned? So the veto is always coming up. Let's see. From Lusanda Batala, would you say the benefits are greater compared to costs in participating in peacekeeping missions? The common view is that the costs outweigh the benefits. Peacekeeping missions, okay. Is DERCO, from Stevens Mukhalapa, is DERCO willing to cooperate and collaborate with other institutions in order to sustain the public diplomacy program? What programs is DERCO planning to roll out? Is DERCO planning to roll out in terms of public diplomacy? This is someone from Brandhill, Africa Institute of Public Diplomacy. They're asking about your programs. And I'm just going through so that, okay, and then maybe a final question from Jessica Machela. A question for the Deputy Minister, can South Africa fully realize its aspirations for Pan-Africanism as an African leader, both within Africa and beyond, when domestic issues such as xenophobia, tribalism, racism, gender inequality remain a dividing force and barrier to change? There were some comments also directed at the other discussants, but due to time, I'm sorry, we'll just focus on the ministers. So I would just invite you, Minister, to come and digest all the questions posed by the discussants as well as the Zoom participants.
Thank you very much, Professor Mkhize. Let me first start with hopefully a concluding quote by Amilcar Cabral, who said, the biggest struggle is against your own weaknesses. So what Cabral said, the biggest struggle for us as Africans is against our own weaknesses. And what is those subjective weaknesses? Ladies and gentlemen, is first to negate from the realization that our prosperity our future for the next generation hinge and are interdependent to the plight of the rest of Africa. So one of our biggest weaknesses is to want to continue to see South Africa as this island of prosperity in the sea of poverty. So our Pan-African outlook should first recognize the interrelation and independency of South Africa with the rest of the African continent. I'm raising it because I've said earlier on, if you look at Africa's GDP, Nigeria is the biggest economy based on the gross domestic product. South Africa, however, is the most industrialized economy on the African continent. Objectively, ladies and gentlemen, it says there's a case to be made for the consolidation of economic relations between South Africa and Nigeria, for example. If you look in the north of Africa, the most developing economy is Egypt. Now, it says there is a common sense for positivity in thinking when we look at how to best calibrate the Cape to Cairo master infrastructure plan. Because for us to implement, for example, your African Continental Free Trade Agreement, it presupposes adequacy of infrastructure. Your Cape to Cairo as a program is one of the most pivotal, foresighted type of a program. If we look at East Africa and you look at the type of economic prosperity that the people of Kenya is facing, it says common sense dictates that the recalibration of our economic and political ties are intertwined to serve, amongst others, national interests and challenges such as poverty, unemployment, and inequality. So that is the first issue that I wanted to state. If you look at, because everyone must ask, look, what is the main export items for South Africa? And so the first thing that we must agree is that we are a mineral wealth rich country. It's a positive and it's a negative. It's a positive because through exportation, we are able to generate and sustain our economy. It's a negative because there's very little value addition. That's why if you export diamonds without value addition, you import it as a ring, isn't it so? As a diamond ring. You import it after value addition has been made. It's a weakness. So, as one of the laws of the elector says, for every positive, there's a negative. It's called the law of unity of opposites. So what we must do to maximally benefit from our international policy realm, and one of the flagship programs at the economic diplomacy level, which is your Continental Free Trade Agreement, is to ensure that we upscale our industrial base, invest as a government more in productive assets, ensure that our academia, our universities, technical colleges produce a skill that is more relevant to the manufacturing requirement that is there. So that is key and critical. If you look at, if we ask a question, all the motor vehicles in South Africa, apart from the ones that are being produced locally, South Africa is the massive importation of the VW Group, Volkswagen, VW Group. It's a massive importation of Hyundai. Hyundai is from South Korea. It's a massive importation of Japanese vehicles, Toyota, isn't it so? So part of our work that we are doing in the foreign policy dispensation is to then implore on those countries, which we have identified as the key segments of importation, to ensure that we want to build what we call production assembly units in South Africa. And that's why, Namslanje, as we are speaking, here in Port Elizabeth, there is production assemblies of some of these international monopoly companies. Those assemblies has not been through the energy of private capital and only private sectors. It has been through the energy of the South African democratic state, through our bilateral relations that we have engaged in. Because any country that do business in South Africa must have what we call a formal bilateral relations and engagements. So the fruits of any foreign production in the South African soil is because of our bilateral relations. Secondly, when we look at the multilateral level, I'm so happy that we have received through acclamation in the public accolades under the leadership of President Ramaphosa and Dr. Pandor for the question of the troops waiver, because it's precisely what we are struggling on a day-to-day basis at a multilateral forum such as the World Trade Organization, WTO, which we are a key subscriber to. So there's certain intellectual and trade agreements that negates from the reality of this inclusive and brighter Africa. And part of our premium position to strengthen our foreign policy dispensation is to ensure that the multilateral fora speaks to the reality of underdevelopment of the African continent and the global South, including specifically your sub-Saharan Africa. That is a key issue in terms of what is a tangible benefits to our people. Your tangible benefits to our people is that at the multilateral level, we engage in world trade agreements that advance the South African and the African people. For example, you have what you call oranges, your citrus fruits. You can't export citrus fruits if there continue to be a barrier of entry into the EU, for example, around what we call your black spot matter as it relates to citrus fruits. So our role, with the role of Department of Trade and Industry, is to ensure that at a political level in your multilateral forum, we speak truth to power and we appeal to the conscience of the more industrial North and developed North for their obligations to the development of Africa. So that is a key and critical issue. If we look at a very important issue that has been raised here about peacekeeping, I think what we must first confirm here is that any peacekeeping operations which South Africa is involved in is adequately voted on, and any peacekeeping operation that we are involved in is subjected to both your regional economic structures and is subjected to the Peace and Security Council. So our participation, for example, at the level of the DRC through your intervention force it's a matter that has been agreed to, voted for by the United Nations, by the United Nations Security Council, with complete acclamation from the side of the African Union and your PSC. So our participation there, it's not a matter of using taxpayers' money in South Africa to bring about a stability elsewhere in the South. It's a mutual beneficial. So I thought I must raise that because, you know, I think everyone have raised it, and I've raised it, that in Mozambique, apart from oil, we have mutual bilateral interests. We have mutual bilateral interests in Tanzania, in Namibia, in Botswana, in Lesotho, in all of the SADC countries. Your biggest trading partners in Africa, as we are speaking, it's from amongst the SADC regions. So the plight and the stability elsewhere of other SADC countries, it's in the immediate interest, in the proximity of interest to South Africa's well-being, to our children's future, to our own employment. So I think that is a key issue that we must recognize. And of course, as we are going to respond, we will be able to provide the detailed figures that we're having in relation to those issues. I think there is a criticism which has been leveled against us through the Zoom forum, which we wish to recognize. And it's a statement that says there's a poverty of South Africa as it relates to the execution of its foreign policy machinery. Now, I think I have raised, when there's a statement made like that, that seeks to dilute our posture, I've said when the South African government gets criticized, it must be criticized based on just 4 intertwined, interdependable foreign policy priorities. 1, our Pan-Africanness outlook. 2, our outlook as it relates to global solidarity. 3, our participation to ensure we deepen cooperation between the North and the South. And 4, our work on global governance. So when we criticize and say, look, there's a poverty of ideas, criticism, it can't be general. It must be particular. It must be specific. We must, that's why today we gave a rapport on what we have done as it relates to the United Nations Security Council and the African Union. That is 2, what we call multilateral forums. What we must invite for the listeners and participants is to contextualize a proper critique on our role. Uguti, what was supposed to have been done and what have not been done. I have raised, for example, subjective weaknesses, which I have raised objectively. I've said in terms of women emancipation, which was one of our 6 priorities during our African Union chairpersonship, I think we have not done enough. Much more work needs to be done. I acknowledge that as it relates to the silencing of the guns is concerned, much work more need to be done in relation to those specific matters. So when we criticize, for example, we are the first to acknowledge, in terms of global solidarity, for example, there's been a debate the past 2-3 weeks on the question as it relates to Cuban technical skills to participate in upskilling South Africans. There's been a debate that says, no, we don't need Cubans to impart technical skills in the forte of our own land. That debate negates from our mantra of global solidarity. Firstly, when many of our own doctors trained in South Africa by South African universities refuse to work at rural hospitals and community health centers, we have utilized the commitment in an unequivocal manner of Cuban medical practitioners. And by the way, ladies and gentlemen, let us not undermine the technical and scientific expertise of the Cubans in terms of primary health care. In terms of primary health care, in the entirety of the world, Cuban primary health care services ranks up there. We have utilized it to ensure that our own primary health care, including when we started to recalibrate your community health care centers, we have utilized our Cuban doctors as an area of expertise. Today, there's an issue raised about Cuban engineers to try to stemify this rapid and large-scale collapse of, for example, local infrastructure. If you go to any municipality in the country, there's a crisis of what we call aging infrastructure, aging road infrastructure, aging sewage infrastructure. What we are saying as the South African government, because of, remember, Cuba have been subjected to decade-long sanctions, decade-long extraterritorial sanctions by the United States of America. They have developed a level of capability and technical expertise in terms of the maintenance of local infrastructure. And our argument at the level of government is to say, let's utilize that type of a skill to reskill and upskill our own engineers, our own young engineers in South Africa. And that is the debate. So any debate that says, no, Bani is taking our job, is a debate that negates from global solidarity. I thought I must make that point. The second last issue, of course, look, I think any institution that is validated are obligated to partner with DERCO, with the Department of International Relations and Cooperation. Remember, the custodian of foreign policy, through being a constitutional or persona, is President Ramaphosa. So your constitutional obligations in terms of foreign policy is vested by the president. He then delegates a particular department, in this aspect, DERCO, to be the champion in terms of the execution of our foreign policy dispensation. We, in turn, with our Minister, Dr. Pando, have recognized the centrality of the role of non-state actors as we champion the execution of our foreign policy dispensation. Probably, I almost said I wanted to agree with the South President, of course, just for the choice of words. But what is pivotal, what they have posited, is that we cannot champion and execute our foreign policy imperatives in isolation to the repository of wealth and knowledge and wisdom that we find in our academic institutions. So any partnership as it relates to clarifying of problematizing certain of our foreign policy is welcome. And that's why today we have what we call in English, the battle of ideas, isn't it so? This is about the battle of ideas, how to reshape, how to refine, so that at all times we are people-centered government, how we execute our policy on foreign trajectories. We must be certain that it finds a acclamation from your academic institutions in the country. The last issue, of course, that I wish to raise once more is the matter about the plight of the Palestine people. I think we have seen it. And we have been consistent as South Africa that your your Middle East peace process, the self-determination of the Palestine child is a process primarily that must be informed and is a process that must be canvassed, and the pencil holder of that process must be the Palestinian people themselves. So the question around the Abraham's Accord that has been manufactured through participation of the former US administration under Donald Trump is an accord that, as the South African state, officially we are frowning upon, because that accord presupposes that the stability in the Middle East and the resolution of the statehood of the Palestinian people is dependent on foreign players. So we are frowning on those type of accords because it goes against the UN Charter of Self-Determination. It goes completely against the UN Charter of Self-Determination. And I think what we are saying is that we are maximizing our diplomatic arsenal to engage a number of actors as it relates to the plight of the Palestinian people. That includes canvassing and speaking truth to power, in particular to those that are opposing the Palestinian people, with specific reference, of course, of us pursuing dialogue with the United States in terms of their role to bring about a normality as it relates to that issues. I think everyone, the audience, will recognize that South Africa, we have taken a conscious and concrete decision to review our diplomatic relations with the state of Israel because of the reluctance to allow the evolution of statehood of the Palestinian people. The fact that during a very religious month and period for the Muslim community internationally called Ramadan, that a state such as Israel could attack religious worshippers in a mosque. It should make all of us to develop a common grievance around the fact that at all times we must err on the side of the most vulnerable. And that's why our foreign policy is a policy that is alive, that is certain, that is predictable, that is based on social justice. So the fact that we have been negatively criticized, Professor Mkhize, about us reviewing our diplomatic relations with Israel, not being consequent of the economic benefits for South Africa, is a matter that we are able to say that we will rather stand for something, we will rather stand firm on principle than fall for anything that is unprincipled. And as Cabral said, our self-centeredness and inward looking, it's one of our biggest weaknesses. And it's a struggle on an everyday basis that we must be able to recalibrate. I want to conclude, Professor Mkhize, by making a commitment that all the commentary and questions on social media, and that any of the audience still need to have our opinion, we will respond and even publicize our response on the social media as it relates to that issue formally. That is our commitment of transparency, because there's nothing untoward to have undertones as it relates to foreign policy dispositioning. So thank you very much. And this was a fantastic lecture hosted by Nelson Mandela University. And my absolute acclamations, Professor Mkhize, for your chairing of the session. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, Deputy Minister. I'd now just like to invite the Executive Dean for the Humanities to deliver her vote of thanks. As we get closer to that part of the program called refreshments.
Thank you, Program Director. Deputy Minister, Mr. Alvin Boat, and your entourage and the leadership from the government structures present here today, and those who are watching in the different media platforms, ambassadors from all over the world. I understand that we've got quite a few of them who are watching, Deputy Minister, this activity. The DVC, in absentia, apologies, I skipped my boss, the Vice Chancellor, Professor Sibongile Mutwa, in her absence, and the DVC, Andre Kiet, who is here with us, still here with us, DVC, Engagement and Transformation, DVC Tandi Gwebi, who had to leave also because of another engagement, and all DVCs who are not here with us, the rest of the university management, my colleagues in the faculty and the rest of the university, the discussant, Dr. Stembele Mbete, and Dr. Pilani Mtembu, amazing students who interacted with the input from the different contributions. I greet you, Diabolisa, this afternoon. It has been an honor for me to listen to the contributions and reflections on South Africa's role in the United Nations Security Council and as chair of the African Union. These are indeed great international highlights for South African history, for South Africa recently. From the discussions today, we can see that the role of South Africa in the United Nations Security Council and AU is both celebrated and contested, but we cannot undermine the meaning of South Africa's presence for the South African region, which continues to be threatened by insecurity in different ways, as alluded to by contributions from the Deputy Minister, from Dr. Mbete and Dr. Tembu. I would have liked our Deputy Minister to make a few comments on the issues that you raised and raised by the other speakers on COVID-19, on issues of security, on issues of women in the continent, and their relations in terms of your inputs here. But in the interest of time, I'm going to skip that and hope that we can engage outside of this platform through our students and our faculty members. And I'm sure that this meeting is just an indication of the kind of engagement that we can have with the department beyond this conversation. It's a very important conversation for us students, especially in the School of Governmental and Social Sciences that is headed by Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, which also is aligned in directly actually with the Raymond Mhlaba Center of Leadership Studies in Management. And this conversation is really critical in continuing, or rather in being taken up, Prof. Mkhize, in the classrooms and in our research activities of our postgraduate students. So if Prof. Dombana there were no areas that covered these aspects that have been given here in whatever we taught in our curricula. It's important that we start to include those now. So if you allow me, program chair, program director, I just want to speak briefly about our faculty of humanities because it's so important. Deputy Minister, I found it fascinating the areas, the issues that we raised, of what you raised, and how they link or aligned to the research activities of the faculty. So as indicated by the VC earlier on in our morning conversation, Nelson Mandela University has prioritized revitalization of humanities to put humanity and African traditions of knowledge systems at the center of how we produce knowledge, actually of who produces knowledge, how we produce knowledge, and what we produce in the targeted community for our knowledge production enterprise. Guided by the philosophies of Pan-Africanism, values of Ubuntu, and environmental sustainability, we hope to contribute further to this African diplomatic agenda, guided by these values that we hold dear in the faculty. Our research priority areas include cultural, literary, and linguistic heritage with a focus on archival studies. We have strong research and teaching on women and gender studies as reflected in the Center of Women and Gender Studies that is headed by Dr. Makukwana. We have third area, innovative humanities, with a focus on digital humanities. Fourthly, we have governance, democracy, human rights, and social justice, and that is being led mostly through the Raymond Mhlaba Center with Professor Luvuyo Ntombana here. We have the fourth area, which is preservation and sustainable use of ocean resources. And so these are the four main focus areas, rather five main focus areas in the faculty. Obviously, we then had to introduce interventions to make sure that we drive these areas. And we have research chairs that are funded externally from the university, primarily by the National Research Forum. And the first one is the African Feminist Imaginations, also driving the gender agenda in the faculty. We have ocean cultures and heritage, looking at the preservation of and sustainable use of ocean resources and ocean heritage. And then the third chair is identity and social cohesion in Africa. So issues of race, all issues related to identity issues. I've already talked about the centers, which is Women and Gender Studies, the Raymond Mhlaba Center. Last one, which we haven't talked about, which is really important in the discussions that have taken place here, is the Center for Philosophy in Africa. It's really important that we start to engaging about who we are as a continent and how we project who we are to ourselves and to the world, an issue that was raised by Dr. Mbete as well. So in terms of the future, we want to center archival studies we actually want the university to be known in the region, if not nationally or continentally, as a center for archival studies, where we focus on those, let's say, African intellectuals, Deputy Minister, I talk about deans all the time. So Deputy Minister, where we center those African scholars, intellectuals that have often been ignored either because of their gender or their ideas and so forth. So we want to focus on that. We need support in that. we've grappled with this, but we want to also focus on global South studies. Initially, we thought we could look at issues of Africa in relation to Asia, Africa-Asia studies, but there's still conversation about that. But the most important thing is that we need to engage with global South countries. And then we want to also start a language center where, amongst other things, we focus on offerings Kiswahili, which is obviously an important language in the African Union, and Arabic, which was a language of trade before we got to interact with Europe as we do now. Generally, we're really a young faculty, literally and figuratively, but with clarity of vision. I would like to believe that. And we need the youth to be able to achieve our objectives. So because of that, there's a need from our side for capacity enhancement support to improve our performance around these objectives that we've outlined here. The youth in our faculty also relates to the degrees that our faculty members hold. So we need to really increase the completion of senior degrees by most of our staff so that we're able to compete effectively with the global community. We need them to be supported for production of new knowledge. All these issues that are raised here are fairly innovative, and very few university curricula engaged with them. And I must say, listening to our speaker, our first student speaker here, I was very excited to hear the experience. Obviously, I'm sure it's from the classroom as well as through exposure with the department. So we need partnerships within the continent, especially within the continent, and also with the rest of the countries of the world. But partnerships that are really mutually beneficial. We're mindful, I was really, Deputy Minister, or rather the point you made, the last 3 points you made, the point you made about the position of Russia and China and how they perceive us. It was very important for me because it's those relationships that are important for us, but we need to understand that we're operating on equal footing. It's really important. And lastly, or maybe, we need exposure of our students through experiential learning opportunities and employment opportunities on completion of their degrees. Lastly, we need support and financial resources always. The humanities faculty are really disadvantaged because focus is on STEM subjects and all that. But we need support in that. Ngalo mazwi, Deputy Minister, I know your status Xhosa ndukuvile usithetha kakhulu, so if andikunika isiduko ngokuqha, I'm not sure uba ndithi ngumcwethe okanye ungubani na. So, but I do want to end off and just name people who I need to thank on behalf of all of us who hosted this. So I do need to acknowledge the Office of the Vice Chancellor, Professor Mutwa, and thank you, Vice Chancellor, for opening the doors of the university to welcome the Deputy Minister, the collaborators and partners who helped to bring this event together. And this is the DVC Engagement and Transformation Prof Kit, and the Dean of Students, Mr. Lutando Jake, thank you very much, and Dr. Laura Best from the VC's office. We appreciate also the instant communications we've had with your office, Deputy Minister. I can mention Mr. Justin here. I think she's here. So we've had really great working relationship with them this time. From the faculty, I want to acknowledge and thank Professor Nomalanga Mkhize, who has really been running with this on my behalf when I'm not available, making decisions on my behalf. Thank you very much, Prof. Mkhize, and for making sure that it's a success. And the person who she always works with, who is also, again, so important in the faculty in conversations like this, Dr. Makokwana, who is not here with us, but who is ensuring that this, whatever is happening here, is received by our online participants. So thank you very much to both of you. I also want to acknowledge the organizing team with the media and communications team of the faculty, of the university, that is constituted by Alison Olivier, Debbie, Derry, Zandile Mbambela, Vuyo Bongela, Ponto Mabena, and Dr. Thomas Helmer. I may have missed some of the people here, but it doesn't mean that they are less important. The student assistants at the Center for Women and Gender Studies, thank you very much. Your work is really acknowledged. Most importantly, I would like to thank you, Deputy Minister, for gracing us with your presence and for starting these important conversations. I'm thinking, Prof. Mkhize, that we're going to have this. I'm saying this now, Mr. Bose, that we're going to have this on an annual basis. And it's not going to be 2 or 3 hours. It's going to be a day or 2 days. We need that 1 hour, 2 hour keynote address. It's really engaging. We need our students, we need our faculty and our university to engage with your thinking around these matters. So thank you very much. Dr. Mbete, thank you very much. That small conversation, I'm going to continue outside of this room. But thank you for getting us to think the way you've done in your conversation. Thank you very much. Dr. Pilani, who is not here with us, thank you very much. Lastly, but not least, there's input from the students. Thank you very, very much. We acknowledge you. Deputy Minister, in the faculty, we express gratitude in isiXhosa. So we, in our expression of gratitude, we invoke 3 things. We invoke humanism. So we say nisenze abantu. Literally, you've made us people, but it really doesn't convey the importance that nisenze abantu does. We also invoke sustainability of relationships. So we say nangamso. So we do want this to continue beyond this. And lastly, we invoke productivity of relationships. So we say makwande. So thank you very much, makwande. With those few words, I just want to ask Deputy Vice Chancellor to come down and just offer gift of appreciation, token of appreciation to our guests. Thank you very much. Yes, yes. The colorful one.
Thank you so much, colleagues. Thank you for being patient and engaging. And I would like to now invite you to the 4th thing, which is ukudla. Of course, we are observing COVID protocol, so you will see that we are giving out a PAX. So please make your way this way. And then if the officials of the department who are tasked with the protocol could just assist in terms of ensuring that the VIPs and the Dean all make it into the smaller room on the side here. Otherwise, everybody else, thank you so much. Thank you, Professor Ndomane. Thank you to the Dean of Student Affairs, Lutando Jack, who's been our pillar throughout all of this. Thank you. Thank you so much for that. Travel safe and maintain your COVID safety. Let me put this on.